Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Student Ministry Matters podcast. My name is Dan Carson, and we are thrilled that you've chosen to download and listen as we continue the conversation about student ministry. Now, in today's podcast, I have a longtime friend with me, and I'm excited that he's here with us. He's going to be sharing about some advice for student ministry workers, but also sharing about his journey. He's currently fighting like a freak, and I'll have him share a little bit more about that. His name's Steven Carroll, and Steven and I met at a place that we talk about a lot here on the podcast, our podcast partner, Central Baptist College of Conway, Arkansas. And so if you have a student who is looking for that next step in their educational journey, have them check it out, cbc.edu. CBC is challenging, engaging, and inspiring. It is a place that is a great one for your students to figure out what's next with a Christ focus. Now, when Steven and I were there, it was called the CBC experience, and we kind of had that time where we got to know people, and we've known each other for, almost a lifetime. It's just been great to reconnect at different points along the way. Steven Carroll has been in student ministry off and on for many years. He served as a student pastor, a pastor. He's done worship leading as well as conference speaking, and he's had a variety of other ministry roles. He just loves to invest in students, and so I was thrilled to have him on here as we talk about his life and what's going on. Welcome to the podcast, Steven.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's good to be here. Appreciate it, the opportunity to be with you.
Well, Steven, for our listeners' sake, where are you at now?
I live in Forney, Texas, which is right outside of Dallas. So we're about 20 minutes from downtown Dallas. And I've been here since 2001.
Okay.
We moved here from Little Rock.
Well, I love the Metroplex. Lived there for a short time while I was in seminary, lived over in Mesquite. And so it was a good time. But if you and your wife, Donna, are going to go out for a meal, where's a place that you guys hit?
Oh, man. I don't know. There's plenty of Mexican places out here, so that's usually where we gravitate. And then, I don't know, honestly. We usually, locally, we'll do Mexican, but then our fallback has always been Saltgrass Steakhouse.
That's a good place.
It's not really distinct to Dallas.
No.
But then the other side of that is anytime we can hit Papacitos or anything like that, we're going to hit that pretty quick.
Good stuff. Hey, to let our listeners know a little bit more about you, as we often do with our guests, could you share with them how you came to know Jesus?
So I grew up, my dad was a pastor. He pastored small Baptist churches the whole time I was growing up. So I've been around, church and been around, Christianity as far as believers and my whole life. And so I was 8 years old, and my dad was pastoring Lake Airland Baptist Church, which is it's down South Arkansas. It's got a Taylor address, but it's not really in Taylor. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But it was just a small wood frame church, and we lived in a little parsonage beside the church. That was a wood frame little parsonage, and that parsonage they added on to it for us because it was me and my sister and my mom and dad. And so I had my own bedroom. I just can remember vividly everything about the moment. I just was at a point where I knew that I'd been around faith, and I knew what faith was, and I knew who Jesus was, and knew the story of the gospel, and just had this, just this connecting moment where I knew I needed to have that conversation. So my dad and I came in there, and we had talked, and it was something where I just at that point chose to believe as a kid, and was baptized. And when I was baptized, I remember that moment because I was chewing gum, because I always chewed gum. And I had gum in my mouth while I was being baptized and almost choked. So anyway, I came up gasping for air out of the baptistry. But, I think that was the thing for me, looking back on my journey with the Lord, and even some things I can share with you in a little bit, but just some thoughts that I had last night. When you're a kid, faith is so much different because it's just, you just believe, it's not abnormal to believe what you're taught, which is a great opportunity for people, which I learned in student ministry, but it's also a great responsibility because you can lead people anywhere. But if you're going to lead them anywhere, it's just to the story of who Jesus was. And I think that was the thing that was most attractive to me, was for some reason early on in my life with my parents, and I think because of what they did. My dad was a bivocational pastor. So he was a guidance counselor, an English teacher at the high school. And my mom, she taught junior high. I was around all kinds of people, and I saw them just love people, from the time I was a kid. And in that relationship, being around people, what attracted me to Jesus wasn't the fear of hell. It wasn't the fear of all that kind of stuff. It was a fact of, I think looking back at it, how I saw my parents love people, and how that my dad taught me, and my mom taught me too, that loving people is what Jesus did and what he was all about. And that's why he was here, is to show us, who God is and how God expects us to love and how God expects us to relate to people. And the message that he brought, with him when he came to earth, and the message he took with him to the cross, and the message that came out of the grave was that message. And so I think looking back, that was that moment. It was just one of those things of like, this is what needs to be done, and this is what I need in my life. And anyway, I can remember every moment about that decision, as far as the room, the bedspread, everything, which is something that's always been significant to me, which was now 42 years ago, right? Is that right? 40? No, that's not right. I'm suffering. 30, I don't know, man. I'm 54. I was like, do the math. Jesus,
That's great.
Yeah, whatever.
What I love hearing, and what I love hearing of many of our stories that are shared, is that mom and dad played a big part of that. And you had this great example. You would see them living out their faith in the real world. And so many times we don't have that opportunity. So let me ask, though, you hit junior high, high school, those student ministry years. Who was investing in your life during that time?
So interestingly enough, my story is different in the standpoint that I grew up in churches. Like when my dad was at Lake Erland in South Arkansas, and he was around, like, we were in the BMA, our church was. But then, so we moved from Lake Erland. My dad went to a church called Spring Branch Baptist Church, which is also in South Arkansas, just outside of Spring Hill, Louisiana, which is where I went to school and where I grew up. And so at Spring Branch, we got connected with, my dad was really good friends with Vernon Lee and Harvey Hall, and just some old, people that have been around the BMA a long time would know some of those names. And so at that time, they started a deal in Magnolia called, it was just like a volleyball tournament. They called it the Youth Hour of Inspiration. That's what it was called. The Youth Hour of Inspiration, which was basically a bunch of kids showing up and a bunch of old pastors making all the decisions. But anyway, but the byproduct of it was the kids got together. And so we would have those events, and, would just be around fun and community and relationships. My dad would always, we didn't really have a youth group, per se at our church with a youth pastor, because it was a small country church, small being, maybe 80 to 100 people on a Sunday morning. But we would do things. And so I'd say early years, it was my dad and mom investing in me. And then there were some teenagers, that kind of, a guy named John Long actually was just a high school student that was really involved. And he was always real encouraging to me as a kid, especially in my junior high years. And then, so we would sing, and we actually had him and his brother and myself. We would sing trios at our church, and just little things like that, where we'd get together at the church and we'd practice, or youth ministry to me in those days was playing fat bat in the back of the church. And if you hit it over the graveyard fence, it was a home run, And then we would do cleanups and Saturday events, and, my dad, and there was different people that would do the old Galilean thing, But I was real fortunate. The people that led my Galilean classes weren't really focused on, which Galileans was a kind of a Bible program, a kids Bible program in our churches at that time. It wasn't really focused on the steps per se, as much as it was about relationships. I just had that common thread in my whole life.
Yeah.
And so we'd hang out and we would learn verses and all that kind of stuff along the way, and so, but then at about 15 years old, my mom and dad got a divorce. When that happened, I was a song leader at the church, at the ripe old age of 14 or something like that. And I'll never forget, it was during the week, and when everything went down, and all those details are not really that important. But I remember the Sunday after my parents split, how that all went down. And I remember feeling like obligated. I needed to be at the church. It was my job, it was my responsibility, blah, blah, blah. And looking back, my mom began to obviously wasn't going to stay at the church just because it was awkward, right? And so they began to say, hey, why don't we go to First Baptist in Spring Hill with my mom and Peepaw, my grandparents, my mom's parents. And so they went to First Baptist. I didn't want to go to First Baptist because it was a big church, because they ran 200 or whatever it was. And I just didn't want to go, And of course, I was a kid. I was 15, and yet felt independent and felt, like I had leadership roles and all that kind of stuff that I felt responsible for, even at that age. But they finally convinced me to go on a Sunday morning. And so I went that morning, and, it was a bigger church, and we sat with my mom and Peepaw, and going out the back door of the church, there was this bearded guy at the back door, and dark-skinned, looking dude, crazy, real animated. And of course, I grew up in a small town, right? So in Spring Hill, Louisiana, everybody knew everybody's business. Plus my dad and my mom taught at the high school and taught at the junior high. So, when you're a kid, you naively think that nobody knows what's going on in your life. After 30 years of student ministry, I know the difference of that.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was going out the back door and was fully convinced I wasn't going back. And as I was going out, it was Donnie Parrish, and Donnie, was Donnie. And if you know Donnie, which many of your listeners are going to know Donnie, but he was the youth pastor at the church, super encouraging and vivacious and all that stuff, personality plus. And knowing probably about my life, knowing who I was, he reached out to me. He said, hey, come back tonight. We'd love to have you come back. And I was real hesitant. And he said, if you come back tonight, you can go to Washington, D.C. with us. We're going to Washington, D.C. this summer on a trip. And then I asked him, there was a girl there that I thought, she was pretty. I said, is she going? And he was like, well, of course she's going. I said, all right, I'll be here. And so that's what got me to church. And so at that point, man, I would say when you think about the heavy influencer in my life, other than what I'd experienced at that point, that's the first time I ever was involved in a youth group. As my sister and I, Lori Klein, who you know, but we had never been involved in anything like that before, and so we started going, and man, I just dove head first. Because it became home. It was, at a time in my life when I was lost and confused and hurting beyond anything that I even understood, and not even recognizing, obviously, the dysfunction of everything that I'd gone through and that we had experienced, and, just not having the capacity to understand that as a kid. I just gravitated to it and sold out to it 100%. And Donnie was, and not just Donnie, but the teachers there, sponsors, guys like a guy named Big Jesse, and, just all these names I could throw at you, but that were involved and were sponsors and were involved in everything. But that was a huge turning point in my life at that point. Because for the next 3 years, it was my life. I was there every time that I had the chance, because the dynamics at my home, I love my parents, right? But at that point, I needed that. Instead of going the opposite direction, which I was teetering on at that point in my life, looking back a little bit, I went the complete opposite direction. Now looking back, I probably could have had a little more balance in my life, but ask a few more questions. But nonetheless, at that point, that was something that kind of led me toward where I was headed. And then the next thing I know, we're going to, you mentioned Central Baptist College. We were going to Central Baptist College for choir festivals, which, but at that time, youth choir was a big deal. Yeah. And it was kind of the connecting point for a lot of youth groups. And so they had this thing called Choir Festival at CBC, and we would go there, and we would practice, and Donnie would do his thing, and we'd go there, and we wanted to win, but the byproduct of it was we got to see all these people and be around all these people. And then somewhere in there, which is so ironic about the whole thing, is what's ironic about it is that Youth Hour of Inspiration thing that I was involved in with Harvey Hall when I was a kid. Harvey took that and turned it into something called Encounter, which the state youth department used to do. And so then here we are at, say I'm 17, 18 years old. We're at this conference called Encounter that they're launching. And that's when, and David Dixon was the preacher that year. And, and all these things just kind of led me to that moment where those are my heavy influencers. And probably getting ahead of you, but to finish the story, because it connects, we go to Encounter, and of course I'd been on choir tours, and I loved my youth group, and I had some of my best friends to this day, are people that we don't stay connected as much as I'd like to, but that I knew through those days. And then we went to Encounter that year, and that's where I felt God kind of lead me in a new direction, which I may be jumping ahead of you a little bit, but that's how student ministry really impacted me in a huge way. And not just personally it impacted me, but it impacted my trajectory as far as my life and the direction I was going. But what it did was it fed that desire that was in me that I'd been taught from an early age. Just love people, and be there for people no matter what. And let that be a pathway for them to understand who Jesus is and what he's all about.
So do you remember what year that was?
Man, that was 1986. In 1986, in December of 1986, because I graduated high school in 87. And so, yeah, that was it. I can't remember the first year. If that was the first year of Encounter, it was somewhere in there because it was just launching. And of course, Donnie. He was heavily involved in it, which was a good thing. And so that's, so our youth group went, man, we had a blast. And we always went when we showed up, that youth group that we were in. And I think this kind of continued in my years of ministry. When we showed up, we showed up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We were there to.
Oh, you did. You did.
We were there to have a big time. And so we were all over that place. We were shooting those freaking dart guns onto the glass elevators of the Excelsior and watching them going up and down, just, having a blast. And, but those were huge moments for me in my life because they kind of set the pattern for my life.
Well, I remember Donnie speaking at Encounter, and I was there as a student, and I remember him telling these stories about the people that were in his life down there in that area. And it was just always fascinating to me that these were real people with crazy lives and stories.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we had some great stories that a lot of them you don't want to probably need to tell on here, but yeah, there's great stories.
Well, Steven and I have known each other really since about around that same sort of time. There were two moments that I remember being impacted by Steven. The first, and I'm not sure which came first, so I'll just share both. One was at my home church, Springdale Missionary Baptist Church. He was with the singers. He ran sound for them, the Central Singers, and he came and he was speaking. He had the opportunity to share, and then after everybody was done, he just took a few minutes with me. And I remember how much that impacted me as a high school student, and had this college guy just sharing with me and encouraging me. And then the other time was I went and visited Central Baptist College. I knew that was kind of where I was thinking about being. And I'm sitting in the middle of a guy's dorm room, and they're all having a devotional, Bible study, because that was kind of what happened. And in busts Steven. Steven's got on a cowboy hat and boots. And somebody's following along, maybe Jason Johnson. I don't remember. It was just all of a sudden, there was Steven, and he's just full of life. Just been so encouraging over the years. We've continued. We've known each other. We were both involved with a camp, Ozarks Baptist Encampment for many years. And I've just loved that he's shared some of those people that have influenced his life and impacted him, because he's impacted a lot of people. But recently you've faced a new challenge. And if you follow Steven online, you're going to see this phrase of fight like a freak. And so, Steven, could you just kind of tell us what's going on in your life?
Yeah. So I don't know where to start. I'd been, over the past year, been having some physical issues, and And so I was having a lot of pain in my ribs and my back, and it kind of progressed more and more where I went to the doctor multiple times over the past year, but never really knowing exactly what was going on. And so this past May of 2022, I went to the doctor for like the 5th time, and somewhere in there, I told the doctor, I was like, look, it feels like the pain is moving around my ribs. It feels like it's hurting on one side, then it's hurting on the next side. And I said, I can't lay down. I'm having to sleep, and I can't lay down. Just the pain's too much. And if I sneezed, if I hiccuped, if I coughed, those kind of things were painful. If I laughed and too hard. And so, long story short, fast forward to July, we were actually at Hot Springs, Arkansas with my family. And so we got there, and I was playing golf and tried to play golf, and I couldn't play. I couldn't swing. It was frustrating. I had a call from a chiropractor friend of ours here in Forney. His name is Matt Nanny, who is I mentioned his whole name because for the rest of my life, I'll remember Matt Nanny. He just messaged me, and he had taken some x-rays, was because Donna had been going to him. He's a really good dude, believer, strong family. And so he had done x-rays and an exam. He called me in Hot Springs. He said, you need to get a CT scan just to be safe. He said, it's probably nothing, but, just to see. And so I came back, and July the 26th, I got the CT scan. And then I was at work the next morning, and I got a call from my doctor. I was actually at a rental place about to rent this big trailer to put some equipment on with the job that I'm working right now currently. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure how I'm going to do all this because I can't lift. It hurts to lift and everything. My doctor calls about 7:15 and said, hey, I need you to come in and do some blood work and urine samples because it looks like you've got cancer. And so I was at the desk. I was at the desk of the rental place, and I was like, I'm fixing to pay for this trailer to rent it. And I remember just looking at the lady and going, I'm going to have to go now. Apparently I have cancer. So I came home and, told Donna, and we just began this journey. That was July the 27th. And I got into the oncologist on the 29th. And that's a fun story to tell, honestly, because I just wasn't going to wait around. And so I called Texas Oncology, there's the front desk, and made my own appointment. Basically, I told them that that was a Thursday, and I said, yeah, I'm supposed to have an appointment tomorrow, and I hadn't heard anything from you guys. And so they were like, what doctor? And a friend of mine had told me, a doctor friend of mine had told me one of the guys' names, and so I used to use that name. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't have anything. And so the next morning, they kind of got me. Once they realized, at that point, we were recognizing that initially we were kind of concerned because I had lesions. The pain that I was having was lesions on every spine, every rib, every vertebrae of my spine and my sternum. And I had one on my humerus. But that was where the pain was coming from. They're basically tumors that are created. And so initially we thought that it was one form of cancer, but turned out it was not. It was a blood cancer called multiple myeloma, which is, it's in the bone marrow. And so they got me to the right doctor, Dr. Mazel, or his office. And so I talked to this guy named Britton, and this is the last part I'll say about this, but his name was Britton, and I told him the same thing. I was like, man, I'm supposed to have an appointment. This is on a Friday morning. So I found out on the 27th. This is the 29th. And I said, man, I'm supposed to have an appointment today. I hadn't heard anything from you guys. And he started looking. He's like, man, we have nothing on you. And I'm like, well, you should. And so they were getting my records, and he finally was like, man, listen. He said, oh, we have nothing on you. There's no way you have an appointment today. I said, okay, I'm lying. I don't really have an appointment, but I really should have an appointment. And I told him about my journey, and he was great. I mean, I'll forever remember his name too, because I was in Greenville, Texas at the time, which is about 45 minutes from my home, about an hour from Dallas. And he said, can you be here by 12:45? And I was like, yes, sir, I can. And so it was just divine at that point,
Yeah.
I mean, God opened the door and got me in. And so I got diagnosed on the 29th of July. And that morning that I went, Dan, I was trying to absorb the fact of what was really happening, and how am I going to approach this, because at that point, and this is another thing I can tell you about, but you start, even last night I woke up and you start just, your mind goes places and you're thinking things that you never I just don't normally think. And so that morning I was in my closet and I was getting ready to go to this appointment on the 29th. In 2000 and whatever, DC Talk did their Jesus Freak tour.
Yeah.
And Donna and I were at a youth specialties convention in Nashville, Tennessee, when they previewed that album. And it was so far beyond anything that we'd ever heard at that point in Christian music. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, and we already loved DC Talk, anyway, just from the stuff that they had done. And so Braden, my son, my oldest son, we would have videos playing at the house, and he would play Jesus Freak all the time. And so we went to a concert. It was Audio Adrenaline and DC Talk. And they had these Freak shirts that I loved. And I got 2 of them for whatever reason. How I ended up with 2, I don't know. But that morning on the 29th, I'm sitting in my closet, and I'm just going through my shirts, and I thought, I'm going to wear that shirt. Because that shirt had to be 2000 and, I don't know. I mean, early 2000s.
Yeah, yeah.
And somewhere in there. Because Braden was born in, no, that's not right. It was Braden was born in 93, so it was the early 90s. That's when that album came out. And so 1993 was Braden's born. So somewhere in there, he was 2, so probably 95. That shirt's old. And then but it's like it's brand new, man. And I put that shirt on, and I just thought, this is how I'm going to approach this, And on the definition of that shirt, it says an ardent enthusiast. Mm. And that was the definition of it. And it meant so much to me back in the day, I think. And even in our student ministry, I mean, we had youth bands playing Jesus Freak, back in my student ministry days at Temple, and we just loved it. And so that was kind of the approach that I took. And so at that point, that's how the whole Fight Like a Freak thing came. I think it was actually my sister Lori that said it first, and because I thought, I'm just going to wear this, and I wore that shirt to every infusion. And so what happened was I got diagnosed and began treatment about 2 weeks later, and I did 15 weeks of treatment. It's called immunotherapy. And I saw good results through that. And so I did that every week for 15 weeks. And then everything's kind of fast paced now for me, because now what's happening is multiple myeloma. To make a long story short, you have to have a stem cell transplant for your best shot at long-term remission.
Right.
And so that's what I've been going through the past, few weeks. But the whole Fight Like a Freak thing was born, Isn't that crazy how 20 plus years ago, you buy a shirt at a concert with a band that meant a lot to you, obviously. And then here you are at this moment, and you're just kind of, everything changes, but that means so much to you, right? So that's kind of the attitude that we've adopted, that I've adopted to kind of go through this. And so the last few weeks since last Thursday, they have to harvest your stem cells. And so I had to get a shot 4 days in a row that would kind of, cause your stem cells to come out into your bloodstream or to produce more so that they can harvest them. And then, so last Thursday that started. And then Friday I had my L4 vertebrae had disintegrated, and I had to have it because of the myeloma. And so I had to have a kyphoplasty, and I had a port put in my chest, or a transfusion line, and then 2 more shots. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week, I did 5-hour sessions where they harvest your stem cells, and it's just, and then next week is the transplant. And so, but, that's kind of the journey that we've been on, and just kind of, you just never think, and people say that all the time. You just don't think that stuff like's going to happen.
Right. Right.
But man, in the middle of it, you begin to learn a lot more quickly about what you really believe and who you are and your doubts, your fears. I minimize things a lot in my own life, and I'm learning that I can't do that anymore. It is what it is, and just have to face it. But through it all, I was telling Donna, my wife, earlier. I woke up early, whatever time, because I sleep in this chair I'm sitting in right now. But you just have these questions, and you start thinking, okay, and you pray, and what do you believe in the middle of all this, and so that's kind of the journey that we are on right now. And I'm just trying to document it and try to keep up with it better, and just kind of share my story, because I think, like the old hymn says, not to be whatever, but it's the truth. I love to tell the story. I think that one of my favorite verses is Revelation 12:11. where it says that they overcame the beast, the dragon, by the power of the blood and the word of their testimony. And it's our story that makes a difference. And isn't that crazy? Because even as I'm talking to you about it, it's crazy to me, because it's like that's what I was taught from as a kid. That's what led me to Jesus in the first place. It was the story, and now, it's still the story. It's always what's real and authentic and true and genuine, through what we face. And so a lot of retrospecting through all this, and a lot of just kind of recognizing it. But that's kind of where we are right now in the journey. So
people have wanted to hear your story. They know you, they love you, they've been praying for you. I wanted to share this today for this purpose. I know that this has been difficult. I have not experienced this myself. What are some of the big lessons that God has taught you? Maybe one or two things.
I think the first thing that I would say is, whenever you in ministry for all these years, as you know, and guys listening know, and people listening know, you hear and you're around people all the time. You hear stories of people getting cancer, or lost loved ones, or illness, or whatever the case is, tragedy of some sort. And early on in my ministry, Richard Walters told me, he said, Steven, if you'd be there for people, genuinely be there for them in the most joyous times of their life and the most difficult times of their life, then you make a difference. And I learned early on that through mentors of mine to tell people, if you don't know what they're feeling, don't tell them. Just be there for them. Because if you don't know, you don't know. But while you're around all those people, you begin to hear things coming out of them, like stuff like, I'm grateful. And at the time, I think you hear them say that and you recognize that's true. And you have that own experience in your life at certain levels, right? But I think the first thing I would say is that, oh man, I'm grateful. And because I know that God didn't do this to me, right? But I know it's a result of just living in this world, and I could take you on a journey with that, which we won't do because that's the rabbit hole we don't want to go down. But because that gets away from what your question is. But I think that's the first thing I would say, man, is that because you look at life differently, and I don't want to. Don't hear me say that this is something. This is not something that I want. It's not like I would rather be grateful and not have to have this.
Right.
But you don't realize how much you're loved, I think, and you learn so much about yourself if you allow it. And I think, Dan, I've been really fortunate to have the people that I've had in my life that help me begin to be introspective a little bit more, sometimes to a fault. But I would say the first thing that I've learned is to be grateful, and gratitude for the standpoint of like, just my family, my wife, and my kids, and then my life and the relationships that I've been blessed to have. And then just being able to like last night, to give you an example, I had to go, I got up in the middle of the night and had to go to the bathroom, and I was sitting there looking in the mirror and, was pulled my shirt up to look at this trifusion line in my chest, and at some point you sit there and you go, this is really happening to me. And then you just start asking, who am I? What do I believe? I mean, praying and going, God, and you start thinking, God, heaven and life and mortality and all this crazy stuff that for whatever reason, I'm 54 years old. That should be something I think about, more, but you don't, because you get so busy with life and you're moving so fast and you've got so much going on and you're trying to handle things. And so in that gratitude, I'm grateful for the perspective, I guess, of just sitting. And last night as I was sitting there praying, I was like, the one thing that I thought, man, was, and this is the truth, I was like, why do I believe in you? And then stuff like that. And then at that moment, I was like, because I've seen you. I've experienced you. I've watched you, my whole life. So sorry. But it's just like this realization that's not syrupy, and which is what I prayed for. I mean, my wife and I both we wanted to face life authentically, which, I haven't. She's really good at it. But, I've been full of crap a lot in my life, too. But I'm not sure that many youth pastors aren't, honestly. But I just, that point, I recognize that. So I'd say first it's that, just, and I think the second thing, beyond, as far as gratitude, is just being able to share, in a way that is, unique. Because I tell people all the time, it's like, when you get a new car or a different car, you're driving around and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere. You never
Yeah.
saw that car before. And now it's the same way with cancer, I think, and with anything that you face. It's like all of a sudden, it's like you are more aware of things. And so I think the first thing is the gratitude. I think the second thing is just being more aware of people, and their needs and how overwhelming it can be because there's so many, right? But at the same time, it's like, it's like I don't know that there's a day that goes by now that I don't hear of somebody that has cancer, or I don't know if it's my ears are more alert. And then I think about all the times that I knew of people that had situations in their life and I just wasn't aware or in tune with their needs as I should have been, and where I could have done a better job of just being there for them. And so I think just being aware of life and, my future and just, your vision being different and in the middle of all this, because it just changes you, if that makes sense. And so those are the things that I've recognized in the midst of, and what's crazy is, and the last thing I'll say about this is that faith becomes, I think it's real to us, right? All along. But in the middle of this situation, because we always, you hear people say we're not promised tomorrow and this and that and all that kind of stuff, right? And then, but these kind of situations bring that light into a whole new focus, and I want to live, so whatever I need to do that, it's like Don and I were talking about earlier. I'm like, I think this week kind of is, it's been real going to treatment every week, but you kind of get into a rhythm where it becomes your new normal, and then you see things that are even worse than what you're experiencing around you, right? And then, but these last couple of weeks have just kind of are heightened. It's more heightened a little bit. And so I think in that awareness, I'm aware of my body. I'm aware of what I eat. I'm aware of what I take in. And that's a choice and that we make. And so these all blend together because I have a wife that supports me in this. I have kids that have been amazing, and like little things like this morning, like bringing firewood in. I'm not supposed to lift anything. So there I am bringing one piece at a time, which is humbling. But that's all how you see it. This is just a season, hopefully, right? And so you just kind of embrace it and let people help and humble yourself in the middle of it and let God kind of show you what he wants to show you and let him teach you what he wants to teach you, and you become aware of that. And then do the things that are necessary. Meditate, pray, and listen, and eat the right stuff, gluten-free, dairy-free, all that stuff. No sugar,
right.
Everything changes. And and you know that because you've made some big health changes in your own life, and just I've watched in your journey. So those are the things I think that are the most pertinent things, is that gratitude and awareness that are both, I think, hugely important in all of our lives. And so that's what I'm learning. And then to not, I think the last thing, this might be 3, but don't be afraid to share what God tells you to share. Don't be afraid to say what God tells you to say. And sometimes it may not be things that people want to hear or even like to hear. It may be different than what they believe, but don't be afraid of it and just speak it, because I have said this multiple times through this, because that codependency has always been a real battle for me. And I've asked myself, why am I worried about what anybody thinks at this point in my life? I mean, what does it matter? Right? And so, anyway, to answer your question, I just feel like those are the things that I've really learned, and that I'm learning, and that I'm continually learning on this journey. Donna said something to me earlier. We were talking, we were eating breakfast, and she's been great, way beyond anything I deserve. But she said, today and tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday, we don't have anything. No treatments, no doctor's appointments, no nothing. Just live in it, which is funny for you to tell Steven Carroll that, right? Because that's what I've always live in the moment. But at that point, I needed to hear that because my mind was going to other places. And I think live today. It brings that whole verse into focus, where Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. So tomorrow's going to take care of itself. Just, live today. And that is so true, in my life today, and just soak up the moments, which I've always prided myself as doing. But then in this moment, I needed to hear that myself because my mind was going places that, I just didn't need to go. So yeah, maybe a longer answer to that question than you wanted, but that's kind of where I'm at, honestly, truthfully.
I just appreciate you sharing. There's a lot that we can learn from the journey you're going on. And there's a lot that you could share with not just those of us in ministry, but those of us that are on the same journey of life. And so let me ask, though, we have an audience of full-time, part-time, bivocational, and volunteer student ministry workers. And so what are some big pieces that you might say, hey, you should be doing this, or you should be working in this way or serving in this way? What would you say to those that are listening that serve students?
So number one, man, right out of the block is the thing when people ask me that question, and looking back over my years in student ministry and just seeing the things that, and not just that, but conferences and, working with student pastors and, whatever it was, camps, everything, is community. It is the most important thing that anybody in student ministry will ever do. And community means getting outside the walls of that building and not expecting for people to come, just if they come, they're going to come because you went out there and you loved them where they were. And I would say that is the most important thing to me, because I just developing a relationship with kids. I never wanted a kid, because I would go to lunchrooms and I don't know if student pastors still do that today or not, but isn't that crazy? I'm even saying that. What the heck? But I just, that was the thing. It was every week, Dan. There was not a week that I wasn't at the school, in the community, at a ball game, even hauling my kids with me at times. And it was just being there, being available, and then having the mindset that said, you know what? If they come, they come, but I want them to know that they're loved. And that served me so well. And it wasn't, unique to me, obviously. I was taught that. I was taught that by mentors in my life that showed me that, because there was a moment in my life in student ministry. I was at Temple Baptist Church, and I'll never forget it. And I was in the game room area looking out this huge window, and there was maybe 30 or 40 kids in that room waiting on me in the fellowship hall, and that was back in the days of Al Denson cassette tapes, and stuff like that. And I just said that. Most people don't even know what it is. I was looking out that window, and I remember asking myself the question, where is everybody? Thinking, where are all the kids? And at that point, I've told this story a lot, but at that point, I was reminded of the time, in the Bible where God got on, David counted his men and was concerned about that. And man, at that point, I would say to every student pastor listening, anybody that wants to be in student ministry, is that at that point, I just began to realize that it's about loving like I'd been taught, but just not being concerned about that stuff. That stuff will take care of itself. If you love kids and you love families where they are, no matter who they are, regardless. And we live in a world today where I know lines can get really blurry, especially in the cultures and the stuff that's going on around us and the way that things are being taught and all that stuff. But I think sometimes that we focus too much on how making sure the lines aren't blurred, that we miss the mentality of saying, I need to be where people are and love them where they are, and trust the fact that I've never saved anybody. I've never changed anybody's life, ever. And that's what Jesus does. And we let him do that. And we let that relationship, let him build faith in kids. Let him build faith in people, and in families. And that is a hot button for me, because you will never, ever, I'm fully convinced you'll never, ever fulfill your purpose in student ministry if you are always focused on how many people are in that room with you on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning. And so I would say coach teams, be involved in the community, love people well, regardless, be involved in sports and athletics and, band, and teach people to do the same thing. And that's what we really believed more than anything, is that if you're a parent, that's first, this community. And that leads me to the second thing of parents, where that my mission statement was, we've been called to partner with parents to grow students who know and love God, their family, their community, and their world. And partnering with parents was one of the biggest things that we ever did. And I learned that from a guy actually named Mark Evans years ago, who pastors a church, and he doesn't even probably know it. But I just began, that mission statement was birthed out of that. And when I was at Temple, I had a youth committee, and it was full of parents. And a lot of times student pastors we're not the parents. And we're intimidated by parents, or we try to be parents, I think, a lot of times. Or we try to be the most important person in a kid's life because we are insecure or whatever we are. Or we think that, but don't do that. I mean, be involved in the community and love people well, no matter who they are, they'll come. But then partner with parents and teach parents to be ministers, to be the greatest youth pastor that a kid will ever have is their mom and dad. And it should be that way. And I know that it's not that case a lot of times. And where that it's not that case, then yeah, we can help. But it's teaching that. And so we tell parents, look, be involved. If your kid's in the band, be a sponsor. If you have kids in athletics, be on the booster club. And I did that. It wasn't like we just talked about it. I was involved in all that. Don and I both were. Don't just speak it. We did it. As our kids got older, we coached. We were on we went to cheer squads. We were in booster clubs. We were, events, fundraising, whatever it was. And we were in the community. And I wasn't there passing out flyers for my next event. I was there just serving. And I can't tell you how many times, even now in my own life, I have a deal I call Hitch and Spin, which is a wedding officiant business, which is another conversation. But even then, I did a wedding this past Sunday. And at that wedding, all I did was show up, love that family, serve that family, do my deal. And I had 4 different people come up to me and say, hey, where do you pastor? Where do you speak? Where do you teach? And I think that's what people don't understand, Dan, is that it's not how big of a show you can produce. And no, don't get me wrong. I loved it. I loved having events. I loved being involved in events. I loved preparing for events. I loved it. Retreats, conferences, whatever it was, nasty nights, whatever, but they came because I believe, not just me, but our team of people were in the community, and we just live life and serve people and love people. And that's what changes people's lives. And it's, that's when people want to know who you are. What do you believe? And that's when you have the opportunity, because they'll see it in your life. And I just think that's what Jesus did. I think that's how he lived. I think that's how he walked. I think that's how he was involved. I think that's what he taught us in everything that he did. And, never ever getting angry or condemning people. I mean, he condemned church people more than anything. We won't get into that. But I think the biggest thing was he just was available for people. And so as a student pastor, those are my two biggest things, man, that I believe were the most important, was being in the community and loving people well, no matter what. And partnering with parents and getting parents involved. And I even had a pastor tell me one time, we went to a retreat and we took almost as many parents as we did kids to that first retreat that we did. And I remember the pastor, he brought me in his office because I charged them half price.
Right.
So, and because if they were going to go, I mean, they're already paying for their kid to go, right? And I remember this pastor looked at me and said, man, we can't afford to have that, pay for that many parents. And my exact words, we can't afford not to pay for that many parents to go. You need to have them involved and teach, let them be a part of this journey with you. And it worked, because I feel like it was something that was really important. And again, it wasn't something that I was unique to me. It was just what I was taught. And I was thankful that I was taught that, because it made a big difference. Last thing, there in our community here, there's this one, and when I say this guy, man, he came in, he was just blowing and going youth pastor, and he was having all these events, and he was giving away crap every week, and so he did this thing where he was giving away Xboxes back in the day, video games. And so I did this big thing. I was like, hey, we're giving away an Xbox this Wednesday night, man. Everybody come, blah, 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 blah. So they all came, and we're getting there. And I had a cardboard box with a big X on it. And I brought that out, and I was like, who wants it? And my whole point was that it's not about this. And I'm not being real, and I'm not saying that you don't give things away, and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying your heart is what matters more than anything, and how you believe and how you live, So anyway, those are my 2 things. I could talk for hours on that, but I would say those 2 things to me were the most important and made the biggest difference. Because I never showed up to one cafeteria with a pile of flyers in my hand. I just didn't.
Right.
Now, am I saying that's bad either? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that I think why you're there is more important. Because I know all of us have to go to those staff meetings, and we have people look at us and ask those questions. How many did you have on Wednesday night? How many, all that stuff comes up. But I'm not saying that's not valuable either. I'm just saying that it's not the most valuable thing that we do, and loving people well is the most valuable thing that we're going to ever do. And being involved in a community like that, because it made a difference. If people want to ask about how it made a difference, we can talk about that. But because it did make a difference.
Yeah.
But all that to me was, thankfully, it was a battle that I still struggled with. How many were there and all. You still battle that, right? It's just reality.
Right.
But it became less of a battle to me, because as I got older, because I realized that that's not why I was there. And then you start seeing the results of it, and you start seeing people coming, to faith and believing and attending, and you see families coming, and you see all this stuff changing, and then empowering people to do it themselves makes a big difference. So, I don't know. How's that? Is that good? I don't know.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate you so much, Steven. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing some great words of wisdom that those of us who've been serving for many years like me, or somebody who's just starting, maybe if they can embrace those things from the start,
it makes a difference.
Huge difference over the years. So, well, let me ask this one thing. We want to help you along the way. Of course, we want to be praying for you, but is it my understanding that you have a GoFundMe account to help in this process?
Yeah, we do. My sister started it for us, and so it's on my social media formats. So like on Facebook, it's Steven Carroll, and then Instagram, you can find it there. And then my sister Lori Klein, she's got it on her deal as well. So, but I can give you a link to it. I appreciate that for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah,
because
we're going to put that in the show notes so that people can help you if they have that opportunity. I'm just so thankful. He mentions Lori. Lori is the voice of our intro. She is a longtime friend as well. We met at Central Baptist College. We came that first year together. Stephen was a little bit older. Stephen was a bit of a legend on campus, and there are lots of stories that we can't share here about that.
Yeah.
So,
there are. There's a lot of good times, man. I appreciate you, Dan. This has been really good for me, dude. Therapeutic to some degree. So, thanks for asking me to do this and following up with me and making sure I get on here with you, because I really appreciate it a lot.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today as we've had a chance to talk to Steven about his journey and the things that he's learned and some things that we need to learn as well. And so I just want to encourage you, lift you up. We're praying for you as you work with students, because student ministry matters.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students, because the work matters.